It's so awful. It's just so awful to have that experience of saying goodnight to somebody and having them leave and then find out the next day that they're gone.
The party at Conan O'Brien's house was supposed to be the perfect Hollywood Christmas wrap-up. Rob Reiner was there, laughing and holding court like the legend he was, while his wife Michele kept the room grounded. Nobody knew that within 24 hours, the industry would be mourning its greatest storyteller under the most horrific circumstances imaginable.
I think I was in shock for quite a while afterwards. There's no other word for it. It's to have that voice go quiet in an instant.
Conan didn't say a word for 2 months, but when he finally spoke, the reality of that night changed everything. Who is Conan to the Reiners? The silence of a late-night legend. For 2 months, the tallest man in late-night television became a ghost. Conan O'Brien, usually the first person to crack a joke or puncture a tense moment with a self-deprecating bit, went silent. He didn't just step away from his podcast, Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend. He stepped away from the public eye entirely. People speculated, as the internet always does, but the truth was far heavier than a simple hiatus. Conan wasn't just mourning a peer. He was the last person to host a man who had become a pillar of his own creative world. When he finally sat down with The New Yorker in February 2026, the wit was gone, replaced by the hollow stare of a man who had seen the before and after of a massacre in the span of a single evening. Conan described the atmosphere of that December 13th party as unusually vibrant. He had invited a tight-knit circle of Hollywood's creative elite, writers, directors, and the old guard of comedy. Rob Reiner was the guest of honor in many ways, the elder statesman who had successfully navigated every era of the business. Conan recalled Rob standing by the fireplace, nursing a drink, looking every bit the satisfied legend. But as Conan broke his silence, he revealed that the vibrancy was undercut by a specific, localized frequency of dread. That frequency was emanating from Rob's son, Nick Reiner. "You spend your whole life as a performer learning how to read a room," Conan told the interviewer. "I've spent 30 years looking at audiences and knowing exactly when the energy shifts by even 1%. That night, the energy didn't just shift, it curdled." He spoke about the physical sensation of watching Rob try to manage his son in the corner of the living room. It wasn't the typical father-son bickering over politics or career choices. It was a visible, vibrating desperation. Rob, the man who directed Stand By Me, a film defined by the tender protection of childhood innocence, was now an aging man trying to protect a party from his own son's deteriorating psyche. According to Conan's account, Nick Reiner's behavior was erratic beyond the usual Hollywood eccentricity. He wasn't just being loud, he was being confrontational. He reportedly approached several high-profile guests, including a prominent A-list actress, and began a repetitive, aggressive line of questioning about their relevance and fame. Conan recalled stepping in twice to redirect the conversation, using humor as a shield, a tactic he's used his entire career, but this time, the shield didn't work. Nick reportedly looked right through him. The most haunting part of Conan's breaking silence was the description of the final goodbye. As the party wound down around midnight, the Reiners prepared to leave. Conan walked them to the door, a standard gesture of a good host. He described Rob looking exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. Rob gave Conan a brief, firm hug and whispered a quick, "Thank you for everything," before ushering Nick toward the car, where Michele was already waiting. Conan watched the taillights of their SUV disappear down the winding Brentwood driveway. He didn't know he was watching a funeral procession. "I went back inside, and the house felt wrong," Conan admitted. "I told Liza, his wife, something is going to happen. I thought maybe a public scene, an arrest, a headline in TMZ about a blowout at a restaurant. I never, in my darkest nightmares, imagined I'd wake up to a crime scene unit in their foyer." The trauma for the O'Brien family wasn't just the news of the deaths. It was the realization of the proximity. The timeline provided by the Los Angeles Police Department suggested that the violence began within 2 hours of them leaving Conan's home. For 2 months, Conan grappled with the what-ifs. What if he had insisted they stay? What if he had called a car for Nick? What if he had spoken up sooner about the tension he felt? These are the questions that silenced the funniest man in America. He spoke about the re-entry into his own life. Returning to the studio felt like a betrayal of the gravity of the situation. He mentioned how the silence of the podcast studio felt deafening because Rob had been one of his favorite guests, a man who understood the rhythm of a joke better than almost anyone. To lose that voice was one thing. To lose it in a way that felt so preventable and yet so inevitable was a burden Conan wasn't prepared to carry. "People want me to be the guy who makes it better," Conan said, his voice reportedly cracking during the interview. "But there is no better here. There's just the hole where Rob and Michele used to be, and there's the kid who did it, who I saw just hours before, looking like he was already in hell." Conan's silence wasn't a choice made for PR, it was a choice made for survival. He needed to ensure his own family felt safe again in their own home, which now felt like the threshold to a tragedy. He described the process of clearing the ghosts out of his living room, of trying to reclaim the space where he last saw his friend alive. The silence he broke wasn't just a lack of talking. It was the end of a period of mourning that has fundamentally changed how he views his role in the Hollywood ecosystem. He's no longer just the jester. He's a witness. The industry reacted to Conan's interview with a mixture of sympathy and somber realization. It humanized the meathead of the 70s and the titan of the 80s, stripping away the celebrity veneer to show a father who was simply trying to get through a Christmas party with a son who was slipping away. Conan's testimony serves as the definitive bridge between the festive Hollywood image and the grim police reports that followed. It provided the why to the how, even if the why makes the story 10 times more painful to hear. In the weeks following the interview, Conan has slowly begun to integrate back into his routine, but the shadow of that night remains. He ended the interview by mentioning a small gift Rob had brought him that night, a rare first-edition book on the history of vaudeville. It sits on Conan's desk, unopened. He says he isn't ready to read the words of the past when the present feels so unfinished. The weight of the evening hasn't lifted. It has just become part of the architecture of his life. While Conan struggled to process the evening, the rest of the world was looking back at the man who gave us the soundtrack to our lives, the architect of the perfect streak. When Conan finally spoke to The New Yorker, he didn't just talk about the tragedy. He spent nearly an hour deconstructing why Rob Reiner mattered so much to him and to the entire DNA of modern comedy. For Conan, Rob wasn't just a guest who happened to be at his house. He was the man who had pulled off what Conan called the greatest 9-year run in the history of cinema. Between 1984 and 1992, Rob Reiner directed a string of films that redefined genres. This is Spinal Tap, The Princess Bride, Stand By Me, When Harry Met Sally, Misery, and A Few Good Men. Conan pointed out that most directors spend their whole lives trying to make just one of those. To make all of them back-to-back is a feat that feels less like talent and more like a mathematical impossibility. You have to understand, Conan said, leaning into the professional admiration he'd bottled up for months. "We all grew up in the shadow of the meathead. We saw Rob as this guy on All in the Family who was the foil for Carol O'Connor. To go from being a sitcom character to being the guy who literally invented the modern mockumentary with Spinal Tap, that's like a minor league pitcher suddenly deciding to become a world-class architect. It shouldn't happen." Conan's obsession with Spinal Tap is well documented, but in the wake of the tragedy, he spoke about it with a new layer of reverence. He described how Rob understood the comedy of the uncomfortable long before it became the standard for shows like The Office or Curb Your Enthusiasm. Rob wasn't looking for the big, broad punchline. He was looking for the truth in the absurdity. Conan argued that without Rob Reiner, his own brand of weird, smart, and slightly unhinged comedy might never have found a mainstream home. But it wasn't just the comedies. Conan touched on the emotional weight of Stand By Me. He recalled talking to Rob about the film's famous ending. The line about never having friends again, like the ones you had when you were 12. Rob had this incredible empathy, Conan noted. He could tap into that specific raw nerve of childhood longing just as easily as he could make you laugh at a heavy metal band getting lost backstage. He was a master of the human condition, which makes the way he died, at the hands of his own flesh and blood, a level of irony that is too cruel for any script. Conan also reflected on Rob's Castle Rock era. He talked about how Rob created a studio that felt like a safe harbor for creatives. In a town known for sharks, Rob was the guy who wanted everyone to win. Conan mentioned that even in his late 70s, Rob was still looking for the next story, still energized by a good script. He was a constant in a business that usually discards its elders. For Conan, who is navigating the later stages of his own legendary career, Rob was the blueprint for how to age with grace, relevance, and a sense of humor. The interview shifted briefly to the political side of Rob's life. Conan admitted that while they didn't always talk politics, he admired Rob's unapologetic loudmouthness. Rob didn't care if he alienated half the country. He cared about what he thought was right. He was a brawler. He fought for early childhood education and civil rights, with the same intensity he used to argue for a specific edit in a film. "I look at my desk," Conan said, "and I see the notes I have for the Oscars. And every time I try to write a joke, I think about Rob. I think about how he would have told me to simplify it. He had this internal compass for what was bullcrap and what was real. To lose that compass right now, when the world feels like it's spinning off its axis, is a catastrophe for the industry." Conan's breakdown of Rob's career served as a eulogy for an era of Hollywood that seems to be disappearing, an era where one man could dominate the cultural conversation through sheer, versatile storytelling. He lamented that we don't make Rob Reiner movies anymore, mid-budget, high-concept stories about people just trying to find a way to connect. By the end of this segment of the interview, it was clear that Conan wasn't just mourning a friend. He was mourning a mentor he never officially asked for. He was mourning the loss of a standard-bearer. The silence Conan broke wasn't just about the night of the deaths. It was about the 2 months he spent watching Rob's old films, trying to find some meaning in the frames. He realized that while the man was gone, the streak remained untouchable. He gave us the movies that taught us how to fall in love, how to be friends, and how to face our fears, Conan concluded. And then he had to face the ultimate fear himself. It's not fair. It's just not fair. Behind every great man is a partner who keeps the world spinning. And for Rob, that was Michele. Michele Singer Reiner, the quiet force. Michele Singer Reiner was never just the director's wife, though she played that role with a grace that anchored Rob through the most turbulent decades of his career. Born in 1943, Michele was a woman of sharp intellect and a discerning eye, a professional photographer who captured the world with a stillness that contrasted Rob's loud, boisterous energy. When they met on the set of When Harry Met Sally in 1988, she was a guest on the set, and he was the man redefining the romantic comedy. The connection was instantaneous. Friends from that era described it not as a Hollywood spark, but as a structural alignment. They were two pillars that simply belonged under the same roof. Conan, in his reflections, spoke of Michele as the silent frequency that kept Rob tuned to the right channel. While Rob was the public face of Castle Rock Entertainment and a vocal political firebrand, Michele was the strategist in the wings. She wasn't interested in the red carpet vanity. She was interested in the work and the family. Her photography wasn't just a hobby. It was a testament to her patience. She had a way of looking at a person and seeing the three things they were trying to hide. A trait that Conan noted made her both intimidating and incredibly comforting to be around at a dinner party. In the 90s and early 2000s, Michele became a quiet powerhouse in California's social and political spheres. She wasn't just attending fundraisers, she was organizing them, specifically focusing on early childhood development and social justice causes that mirrored Rob's public advocacy. It was Michele who often did the heavy lifting for the I Am Your Child Foundation, ensuring that the passion Rob projected on television was backed up by actual policy work and grassroots funding. She was a woman who understood that legacy isn't built on box office numbers alone, but on the invisible fingerprints you leave on the community. At the O'Brien party on that final night, Michele was reportedly the picture of composure, even as the situation with Nick began to fray at the edges. Guests recalled her moving through the room with a practiced, protective elegance. She was the one who smoothed over the awkward silences left in her son's wake, the one who caught Rob's eye from across the room when the tension spiked. For 35 years, she had been the emotional cartographer of the Reiner family, navigating the highs of Oscar seasons and the lows of their son's long public struggle with mental health. Conan recalled a specific moment from that evening where Michele stood by the window, looking out at the canyon. She looked tired, he admitted, but it wasn't the kind of tired you get from a long day. It was the kind of tired you get from a long century. It was the exhaustion of a mother who had spent decades trying to hold a shield over a son who was determined to run into the rain. Yet, even then, she was the one making sure Liza O'Brien felt supported, the one asking about the kids, the one maintaining the civilized front that Hollywood demands even when the heart is breaking. Her death, alongside Rob, felt like the extinguishing of a singular light. In a town where marriages are often treated as temporary business arrangements, the Reiners were an anomaly, a true partnership of souls. They were found together, a final, tragic image of a union that refused to be broken even by the unthinkable. The industry didn't just lose a legendary director that night, it lost the woman who made that director's life possible. The photographer who saw the beauty in the chaos until the very last frame. Together, they built a dynasty, but even the strongest foundations can develop cracks that the public never sees. The Reiner dynasty and the descent of Nick. To understand the horror of December 14th, 2025, you have to understand that the Reiners didn't just have a troubled son, they had a son whose entire life was a battleground between the creative legacy of his father and the chemical warfare of his own brain. Rob and Michele didn't turn their backs on Nick. They fought for him with every resource Hollywood money could buy, a struggle that eventually became the very thing that ended them. The Reiner family dynamic was a complex architecture of love, public visibility, and private terror. Rob Reiner, the man who gave the world the ultimate buddy movies like Stand By Me, spent the last 20 years of his life trying to be the ultimate protector for a son who was increasingly impossible to protect. Nick Reiner, now 32, had been in and out of rehabilitation 18 times before he even hit his 20s. His first stint in rehab was at age 14. For the Reiners, normal life involved constant monitoring, middle-of-the-night phone calls from treatment centers, and the crushing realization that their son was slipping into a darkness that even Rob's legendary warmth couldn't light up. In 2015, Rob and Nick attempted a form of public exorcism by collaborating on the film Being Charlie. It was a semi-autobiographical story about a politician's son, played by Nick's stand-in, struggling with addiction. Rob directed it. Nick co-wrote it. At the time, it was touted as a breakthrough in their relationship, a way for a father to finally see his son through the lens of a camera. But the happy ending of the film didn't translate to real life. Behind the scenes, the cycle of addiction was being fueled by something far more sinister than just substance abuse, a diagnosis of schizophrenia and schizoaffective disorder. The decline of the Reiner dynasty became a quiet, open secret in Brentwood. Police had been called to the Reiner residence multiple times over the last decade for disturbances involving Nick. In 2020, the situation became so dire that Nick was placed under a year-long mental health conservatorship. When that ended in 2021, the family tried to return to some semblance of a routine, with Nick eventually moving back into the Brentwood estate. It was an act of parental hope that many now view as a fatal miscalculation, though, as Conan O'Brien pointed out in his interview, what else is a father supposed to do? You don't throw your kid to the wolves. By the night of the party at Conan's, that hope had reached its breaking point. Multiple witnesses, including actor Bill Hader and director Ron Howard, reported that Nick was freaking everyone out. He wasn't just being a disruptive kid, he was in the throes of a perceived psychotic break, fixating on the fame of the guests and getting into a very loud, aggressive argument with Rob in the corner of the room. Rob, usually the most patient man in any room, was seen finally snapping, chastising Nick for his behavior before deciding it was time to leave. They left the party early, a trio walking into the night, looking like any other family having a bad holiday evening. The details of what happened once they crossed the threshold of their own home are now part of a first-degree case that has paralyzed the industry. The Los Angeles County Medical Examiner's report was clinical and devastating. Rob and Michele died within minutes of each other from multiple sharp force injuries. The man who taught us how to laugh at the absurdity of life was silenced by a kitchen knife, held by the boy he had spent 18 rehabs trying to save. When their daughter Romy discovered the scene the next afternoon, the Reiner legacy, as a family, as a creative force, as a pillar of Brentwood, was effectively over. The tragedy of Nick Reiner isn't just a story of a bad seed. It's a story of the limits of love and the terrifying reality of untreated or resistant mental illness in a town where the image of success is everything. Nick is currently being held at the Twin Towers Correctional Facility, often appearing in court in a prevention smock, a hollowed-out version of the kid who once wrote scripts with his father. For the Reiners, the Castle Rock was a fortress that ultimately couldn't keep the danger out, because the danger was already inside, eating dinner at the table. Those years of struggle culminated in a single violent night that wiped out a Hollywood era. The Brentwood tragedy, anatomy of a loss. The aftermath of that day didn't just leave a hole in the Reiner family, it left a scar on the very geography of Hollywood. The Brentwood estate, once a place of legendary poker games and political brainstorming sessions, became a somber landmark cordoned off by yellow tape. For Conan O'Brien, that tape felt like it was wrapped around his own front door. As the host of the upcoming 98th Academy Awards on March 15, 2026, Conan found himself in the impossible position of having to pivot from being a traumatized witness to being the master of ceremonies for the industry's biggest night of mourning. The anatomy of this loss is uniquely devastating because of how public the Reiners were in their private kindness. In the weeks following the tragedy, the LAPD released chilling details that confirmed the before and after of the O'Brien party. The medical examiner noted that Rob and Michele died within minutes of each other in the early morning hours, likely just as the last of Conan's party guests were finally falling asleep in their own beds. This proximity, the idea that a legend was being extinguished while the echoes of a holiday party were still fresh, haunted Conan. He admitted in his New Yorker interview that he struggled with the senselessness of the timing, a feeling that the universe had botched the script. The loss rippled out through the Castle Rock family. Billy Crystal and Meg Ryan, who owe their most iconic cinematic moments to Rob, were reportedly inconsolable in the weeks following the news. As the Oscars approach, the industry is preparing for a tribute that Conan will have to introduce. Reports suggest that Crystal and Ryan will reunite on stage during the In Memoriam segment, a moment that Conan has been meticulously refining. He isn't just writing an intro, he's writing a final letter to a friend. He has reportedly pushed for the segment to focus not on the tragedy of their death, but on the vitality of their lives, the laughter of Spinal Tap, and the quiet, steady strength of Michele. For Conan, the tragedy became a catalyst for a deeper conversation about the Hollywood mask. He spoke about how the industry is designed to hide the very things that killed Rob and Michele: mental illness, the strain of a problem child, and the exhaustion of maintaining a perfect legacy while your house is on fire. By breaking his silence, Conan stripped away the gloss. He made it clear that no amount of fame, no number of classic movies, and no amount of wealth can insulate a family from the raw, terrifying realities of the human condition. He turned the tragedy into a mirror, forcing his peers to look at the nicks in their own lives before the lights go out. As we move toward the 2026 Oscars, the Brentwood tragedy has shifted from a tabloid headline into a somber era of reflection. The seat where Rob Reiner would have sat, likely in the front row, laughing the loudest, will be empty. But as Conan prepares to take the stage, he carries the weight of that final good night from his driveway. He understands that his job isn't to make the audience forget what happened. It's to make sure they remember why the loss is so profound. The silence has been broken. The facts are out. And all that's left is the tribute. Beyond the personal grief shared by friends like Conan O'Brien, the industry-wide response has been a rare, unified display of mourning, a unified voice of the legends. In the wake of the news, a rare joint statement was released by a group of Hollywood's inner circle, including figures like Billy Crystal, Larry David, Martin Short, and Albert Brooks. They bypassed standard PR condolences to issue a reflection on the hole left in their lives. The statement quoted, "It's a Wonderful Life, one of Rob's favorite films. Each man's life touches so many other lives, and when he isn't around, he leaves an awful hole, doesn't he?" For this group, the loss was personal. Rob was the man who had learned from legends like Carl Reiner and Norman Lear, and became a master storyteller in his own right. The Reiners' impact on social justice was underscored by the level of political response. Statements poured in from across the political spectrum, including from former President Joe Biden, who praised their character and lifelong advocacy. Rob and Michele were known for their unselfish devotion to the betterment of others, fighting for early childhood education and civil rights. This legacy of activism made the sudden, violent nature of their passing feel even more incongruous to the lives they actually lived. As the 98th Academy Awards approach on March 15th, details have emerged about a massive in memoriam centerpiece. Billy Crystal and Meg Ryan are set to reunite on stage to honor the filmmaker who brought them together for When Harry Met Sally. They are expected to be joined by stars from throughout the Perfect Streak, including cast members from Stand By Me. Conan, as the host, has been clear about his desire to celebrate the vitality of their lives rather than just the tragedy of their end. On March 6th, what would have been Rob's 79th birthday, Cary Elwes shared an emotional throwback photo from the set of The Princess Bride, expressing that life felt painful without the director's presence. Similar sentiments have been echoed by stars ranging from Kathy Bates to Jamie Lee Curtis. These gestures have helped shift the narrative back toward the man who gave the world some of its most beloved stories. While Conan continues to carry the weight of that final party, the rest of the world is finding its own way to say goodbye to the man who made us believe in miracles. Subscribe to the channel for more riveting stories, this time of a timeless friendship. Thanks for watching.